The day our wedding photos vanished. I didn't realize the man who took them had accidentally left behind the evidence that would destroy my fiancé's powerful family. I didn't lose the pictures. I uncovered a digital trail leading straight to an accusation far worse than fraud, something that required armed men showing up at a remote cabin at 4 a.m. The silence in the apartment was thick, the kind that tastes metallic, like leaking an old battery. I stood in front of the glowing monitor, the cursor blinking mockingly at me in the empty file directory labeled wedding_high-res_final. I kept refreshing the browser, praying for the cloud service to spontaneously correct its error, to speed out the thousands of perfect moments we'd captured just 6 weeks ago. The tear on my mother's cheek, the embarrassing off-key chorus when my groomsmen tried to sing, the exact way the light hit Sarah's veil as she walked toward me. It had been her idea, really, to hire MIL. I should have seen the red flags then, but I was blinded by the promise of unparalleled cinematic quality and a portfolio that looked like it belonged in a glossy magazine. MIL, Marcus, the lead photographer, had a sleek website and an unnerving, almost unnaturally calm demeanor. Sarah adored him. I was skeptical. He charged triple what anyone else quoted, but Sarah insisted. "Darling, this is the one thing we can't compromise on. These memories are forever." So, we paid. We signed the contract, which, looking back now, was a masterpiece of legal obfuscation designed to protect him from everything, and thus from nothing. The wedding day itself was flawless. Marcus and his second shooter, Chloe, were ghosts, efficient and unobtrusive. The photos came back 3 weeks later, and they were, initially, breathtaking. The colors, the framing, it was art. We spent an entire weekend reliving the day, downloading them onto 3 separate external drives, backing them up to the cloud storage Marcus recommended, which, ironically, was the one service he had full administrative access to. That was 3 days ago. I was preparing a slideshow for our anniversary party, a small, intimate gathering, when I noticed the primary folder on the main desktop drive was suspiciously light. I clicked the cloud link. Nothing. Just a simple, clean directory structure, completely devoid of our life-altering event. "Sarah," I called out, my voice sounding brittle, almost unfamiliar. She was in the kitchen, setting out artisanal crackers. She looked up, that radiant smile still so easy for her. "Did you find the good champagne yet, honey? I think I saw it behind the pasta maker." "No, not the champagne," I said, stepping slowly toward her, gripping the edge of the doorway so I wouldn't sway. "It's the photos. They're gone." Sarah laughed, a light, dismissive sound. "Gone? What do you mean, gone? Did you accidentally move them to the archive folder? You know how you are with digital organization." "I didn't move them, Sarah. I checked the primary drive, the backup drives, and the cloud server. The master folder, the one labeled wedding_high-res_final, is completely empty. I checked the trash bins on every device. Nothing." Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of vague annoyance. "Well, call MIL immediately. He probably just needs to re-upload them from his main server. It's probably a sync error on our end. Don't panic." I grabbed my phone, already dialing Marcus's professional line. It rang twice, then went straight to voicemail. The recording was Marcus's voice, smooth as oiled silk. "You've reached MIL Photography. If this is regarding a new booking, please leave your details. For existing clients, please use the dedicated client portal." I left a terse, polite message, explaining the data loss and requesting an immediate callback. Then, I went to the client portal, the secure site where we had downloaded the initial proof sets. I logged in, my fingers flying across the keyboard, my heart beginning a frantic drum solo against my ribs. The portal opened. The gallery was still there, the small, watermarked proofs we had approved. But when I clicked the download link for the full resolution package, a message popped up. Not an error message, a notification. Data package our_wedding_July_14 has been permanently archived and deleted from server at 10:47 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on October 3rd. Customer Service Policy 4C states that all client data is purged 60 days post-final delivery unless an extended archival service is purchased. Thank you for choosing MIL Photography. 60 days. The final delivery date had been August 15th. Today was October 20th. We were 10 days past the grace period, assuming the policy even applied to a catastrophic loss like this. I turned back to Sarah, holding the laptop screen up so she could read the sterile text. Her face went from confused to ashen in seconds. Archived? Deleted? Marcus said they would stay on his server indefinitely. We paid for the premium package, she whispered, reaching for the laptop, her fingers shaking violently as she traced the unforgiving words on the screen. He said that, yes, but he didn't mention the expiration date in the contract, did he? I countered, my voice dangerously low. I have the contract here. I'm looking at the PDF right now. There is no mention of a 60-day purge. There is only a liability waiver that makes us responsible for our own long-term storage. We stared at each other, the reality sinking in like a stone. Our entire visual history of the most important day of our lives, gone. Unless Marcus had a local copy on his personal hard drive, we were finished.
I called his personal cell, the one he gave us for emergencies during the reception. It rang 5 times. Silence. Then a text message arrived. It wasn't a callback. It was a single line. Out of the country. Tech issue. Handled on return. Don't worry.
Out of the country? Sarah shrieked, grabbing her own phone. He knew we needed those photos. He knew we were hosting the anniversary party. He's avoiding us. My gut clenched. This wasn't incompetence. Incompetence involves forgetting, making mistakes, apologizing profusely. This felt deliberate. Marcus hadn't just forgotten to renew a server subscription. He had actively purged the data right before the contract window closed, while we were still operating under the assumption that the secure cloud was our safe harbor. I opened my email, scrolling back to the initial exchanges with Marcus. I needed something, a misplaced word, a hint of malice. And then, buried deep under mountains of vendor selection emails, I found it. A thread from 6 months ago, when we were negotiating the price. Sarah, bless her heart, had been very vocal about wanting to use the drone footage she had commissioned separately from another company, footage Marcus had tried to convince us to drop because his team could do better. She'd written clearly, "We are keeping the external drone package, Marcus, because we need redundancy. We don't trust one source for everything." Marcus's reply was chillingly brief, almost hidden at the bottom of the thread. "Understood. I will ensure the final product reflects the premium experience you expect. No need for unnecessary complications." Complications? Was deleting our only high-res backup considered removing a complication? I didn't wait for Marcus to return. I drove straight to the business address listed on his website, a trendy, shared co-working space downtown. The receptionist gave me a sympathetic look when I asked for MIL Photography. "Oh, Marcus? He actually moved out last week."
Said he was consolidating operations remotely. We haven't seen him here in days.
My blood ran cold. He hadn't just left the country. He had ghosted his office space before the purge notification even went out. He set the timer, he hit send, and he vanished. I went home, rage finally eclipsing the panic. I told Sarah we needed to talk strategy. We had to assume the worst. The photos were deliberately destroyed. But why? He took a massive sum of money. If he was a common thief, he would have just run off with the payment. This felt like sabotage, an act of spite, or worse, a statement. "We have to go to the police," Sarah insisted, pacing the living room, tears finally breaking through her shock. "This is fraud. He took our money and destroyed evidence of the service he was paid to provide." I shook my head slowly. Not yet.
If we go to the police now, we have no proof of intentional destruction, just a contract dispute over data retention. He'll claim it was an automated system error, which, technically, the contract allows for. We need to find out why he did this. Did he steal the digital negatives for himself? Did he sell them? Or is this something much darker? I remembered the conversation from the day before we signed the final service agreement. Sarah had been showing Marcus a very private, candid photo from the rehearsal dinner, a moment where Sarah's overbearing, very wealthy uncle, Mr. Henderson, was having a very animated, angry conversation with a nervous-looking caterer. Marcus had glanced at it, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly, before immediately returning his focus to the color correction screen. I pulled up the rehearsal dinner gallery on the proof site. There it was. Uncle Henderson, red-faced, gesturing wildly toward a discreet side door. And then I noticed something new. The photo right next to it, a wide shot of the receiving line, now looked different.
The background was blurry. The focus jarringly pulled away from the guests and toward that same side door. I zoomed in on the blurry background of the second photo, my hands slick with sweat. It wasn't just blurry. It looked digitally altered, poorly masked. It was as if Marcus had tried to remove someone from the background of that shot and done a rush job. And who was standing right next to that door? A man in a dark suit holding a slim, dark briefcase. A man who definitely wasn't one of our wedding guests. I cross-referenced the images with the initial proofs we'd seen right after the wedding. In the original proof, the man hadn't been there. The area around the door had been clear. Marcus hadn't just deleted our wedding photos, he had modified some of the initial evidence, replacing the originals with doctored versions before the final purge. This wasn't about $10,000 for a wedding album. This was about covering tracks. But what tracks? And why did my wedding become the perfect, untraceable place to make those tracks disappear? I stared at the grainy image of the man by the door, the one who was only visible now because Marcus had replaced the real background with a bad digital smudge. My Uncle Henderson was a high-level executive in defense contracting. Suddenly, my stomach dropped with a horrifying realization. If this network was capable of such meticulous digital destruction, what were they capable of in the real world? And what precisely had Marcus photographed near that side door that made him risk everything to erase it? I knew then that I couldn't just call the authorities about stolen property. I was stepping onto a much more dangerous landscape. I had to find Marcus before he disappeared entirely, because I suspected those deleted photos contained proof of a far more serious, potentially life-ruining accusation. A real danger, not just a financial scam. I had to track down the only man who knew what was on those drives. And he was somewhere in the world, unreachable, holding a ticking time bomb. The next 48 hours were a blur of adrenaline and paranoia. Sarah was convinced I was spiraling, obsessing over shadows. She kept repeating, "It's just photos, Mark. Bad photos. We can reshoot some portraits. We'll move on." But I couldn't move on. When I knew Marcus hadn't just lost data, he'd conducted an extraction. I started digging into MIL photography, treating it less like a small business and more like a shell corporation. His website looked professional, but a deep dive using public domain registries showed the company was registered to a P.O. box managed by a third-party virtual office service, a classic move for anyone wanting distance. The studio space he'd shown us was a rented room in a shared hub, easily disposable. The key, I decided, lay with Chloe, the second shooter. She was the only other person with access to the raw files on the wedding day. If Marcus was running an operation, she was either a co-conspirator or an unwitting pawn. I found her via LinkedIn. She was listed as a freelance visual artist based in the city. Coincidentally, she specialized in event videography, the exact service Marcus had tried to upsell us on, claiming her drone work was substandard. A quick search of her public social media profiles revealed she often tagged her locations. Her last few posts were from a remote cabin rental in the Cascade foothills,
clearly taken just before Marcus sent his cryptic text about being out of the country. I drove up that night, leaving Sarah a vague note about needing a clear head and taking the old battered laptop that didn't sync to any of our cloud services. If Marcus was tracking digital footprints, I wanted to walk the landline. The cabin was isolated, nestled deep in a grove of pines.
It was dark when I pulled up, the only light coming from a single window, glowing faintly in the back corner of the structure. I cut the engine about a quarter-mile down the dirt track and proceeded on foot, my breath misting in the cold mountain air. I approached slowly, sticking to the thick shadows of the trees. As I got closer, I could hear muffled sound, not music, not conversation, but the steady, rhythmic whirring of machinery. It sounded like a high-end ventilation system or a server bank running hard. Not exactly standard vacation ambience. I circled the perimeter. The main windows were covered with thick, dark curtains, but there was a utility shed attached to the back, its door slightly ajar, perhaps a quarter-inch gap. From that gap seeped a thin ribbon of sickly yellow light. I pressed my ear against the rough wood of the shed door. The whirring was louder here, accompanied by a faint, high-pitched electronic whine. It sounded like serious processing power at work. This wasn't a vacation. It was a temporary staging post. I carefully slid my hand into the gap, feeling around for a latch or a handle. The door was stiff, probably swollen from the damp. I gently pushed inward, just enough to slip my eye into the opening. The shed was entirely repurposed. It was cold, insulated, and dominated by a makeshift setup. There were 3 large, humming computer towers stacked precariously on cinder blocks, connected by a tangle of bright orange and blue cables running to a single, professional-grade monitor. Sitting hunched over the keyboard, illuminated by the cold blue glow of the screen, was Chloe. She wasn't taking photos, she was working, or rather, she was monitoring something. On the screen, I could make out lines of code scrolling rapidly. They weren't image editing software. They looked like network diagnostics or data stream monitoring tools. And pinned to the corner of the monitor with a piece of tape was a small printed photo. It was one of our wedding photos, the one of Uncle Henderson arguing near the side door. But this version was different from the one on the proof site. In this version, the man in the dark suit was clearly visible. He wasn't just holding a briefcase, he was handing it, or perhaps receiving it, from Henderson. And the look on Henderson's face wasn't anger, it was sheer, abject terror. I realized the implications instantly. Marcus hadn't just deleted the evidence, he had transferred the key data, the high-resolution, untainted originals, somewhere else, perhaps the source of the data Chloe was now monitoring. He was using Chloe's isolated location to process or perhaps securely transmit whatever was in those original files that implicated my powerful uncle in something deeply illegal. And by deleting our copies, Marcus ensured that if anyone looked into the missing data, they would find nothing that corroborated the photo of the exchange. I was about to pull back, needing a plan of attack, when Chloe shifted suddenly. She reached over and picked up a small black object resting next to her keyboard. It was a satellite phone. She powered it on, the screen flickering to life. A moment later, a text message appeared on the small screen, one that Chloe clearly wasn't expecting to see yet. It was a time-stamped notification from an encrypted service. She squinted at it, then her eyes went wide with panic. She wasn't reading a message to her. She was reading a message Marcus had sent to someone else, a message that had apparently been routed through her local connection by mistake. She leaned in close to read the full text aloud, whispering frantically to herself in a voice I barely recognized. "The package is secure. Henderson has been successfully contained. The cleanup must be executed before the fiancé notices the pattern shift in the archived logs. Assume Mark is compromised. Terminate all contacts at 0400 hours. Containment, cleanup, terminate." My blood turned to ice. She thought Marcus had contained Uncle Henderson. But the picture showed Henderson terrified, clearly under duress. And the phrase, "assume Mark is compromised." That meant Marcus knew I was investigating. And now, through Chloe's accidental message, he knew I had found her location. Just as the words left her mouth, the cabin's main overhead lights snapped on, flooding the small clearing with harsh yellow glare, instantly silhouetting Chloe in the shed window. She whipped her head around, her eyes locking directly onto the sliver of space where my own face had been moments before. She didn't scream. Instead, she scrambled backward, overturning her chair, knocking the satellite phone onto the floor. Before she could even fully rise, a heavy, dull thud echoed from the main cabin door, followed by the sound of the lock mechanism being violently forced inward. Chloe looked trapped, staring wide-eyed at the rapidly splintering door frame of the shed, realizing she wasn't alone at this remote location, and whoever was coming wasn't Marcus. The sound of the main cabin door giving way was like a gunshot in the silent woods. Chloe froze, her breath hitching audibly even from my vantage point outside the shed. She wasn't looking at me anymore. Her terror was now directed inward, toward the main house. Whatever operation Marcos had set up here was about to be raided, or perhaps secured by a third party who considered Marcus's timeline obsolete. I didn't hesitate. My adrenaline spiked, overriding any rational thought about stealth. If dangerous people were converging on this location, I needed to know who they were and ensure Chloe didn't just become another contained element. I backed away from the shed just as a massive shadow filled the opening, blocking the weak yellow light. The figure was large, silhouetted, and moved with a cold, professional speed that screamed training. This wasn't the police. This was an extraction team, moving in with brutal efficiency. I dove behind the nearest thick pine just as a sharp, blinding tactical flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, sweeping the clearing where I had just been standing. The beam paused, caught on the disturbed pine needles where I'd crawled, then swung toward the shed. Inside the shed, Chloe had managed to recover the satellite phone. She was fumbling with it, clearly trying to send a message before being apprehended. "Stop moving!" A voice boomed from the main cabin, deep and utterly devoid of inflection. It wasn't Marcus's smooth baritone. This was someone else entirely, someone with authority. The heavy-set figure in the shed doorway stepped fully inside, disappearing from my view for a crucial second. Then, a sharp metallic click sounded, the unmistakable sound of a security mechanism being armed, or perhaps a weapon being cocked. I had to risk it. If the photos implicated my uncle in some kind of corporate espionage or worse, and these people were here to silence Chloe and retrieve whatever she was monitoring, I had to get the information before they did. The originals were likely on those servers, and Chloe was the last living link to Marcus's plan. I burst from behind the tree line, sprinting toward the shed, not caring if I was seen. "Hey, get away from her!" I shouted, my voice cracking under the pressure. The figure in the shed reacted instantly. He spun around, the flashlight beam momentarily catching my face before I threw my arm up to shield my eyes. I didn't see a gun, but I saw the intent. He was blocking the exit, placing himself between Chloe and me. "Stay back, civilian. This is a restricted area," the man commanded, his voice laced with dangerous authority. But Chloe screamed, a raw, terrified sound. "He lied! The files aren't gone! He transferred everything to the secure drive." He betrayed us. She wasn't talking about Marcus now. She was talking to the man who had just entered the shed, or perhaps someone in the house. The large operative hesitated for a fraction of a second, looking from me to Chloe, then back toward the main cabin. That moment of distraction was all I needed. I lunged past him, scraping my shoulder painfully against the doorframe, tumbling into the small, cluttered shed. The server towers immediately caught my attention. Chloe was scrambling toward the main computer console. "The primary drive! Get the drive!" she yelled, pointing frantically at the middle tower. The large operative recovered fast. He made a grab for my jacket, but I ducked low, grabbing a heavy, rubber-cased external hard drive that was connected to the tower via a thick USB cable. It was warm to the touch. I yanked it free. The cable snapped with a soft pop, but the drive was in my hand. "That belongs to my employer," the operative roared, lunging for me. I didn't have time to run out the way I came. The entire clearing was lit up now,
and I could hear other footsteps crunching heavily on the pine needles around the perimeter of the shed. I was surrounded. Thinking fast, I turned and hurled the drive, the only evidence connecting me, my uncle, and Marcus, not toward the woods, but directly at the main bank of humming servers. The drive connected with the side of the central tower with a sickening crunch, sending a shower of sparks and a loud pop across the workspace. The servers died instantly. The whirring stopped. The cold blue light vanished, plunging the shed into near total darkness, save for the beam of the operative's dropped flashlight, which was pointing uselessly at the ceiling. The large operative stopped dead, staring at the smoking equipment, his entire mission suddenly vaporized. "What have you done?" Chloe whispered, horrified.
Secure the assets. Leave the civilian. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you to leave the ship. We will not allow you. Secure the assets. Leave the civilian. We don't need him complicating the narrative. The operative, clearly taking orders from this new, unseen authority, ignored me and grabbed Chloe's arm with crushing force. He dragged her toward the main cabin door, pulling her into the brighter light of the interior. I was left alone in the sudden, deafening silence of the dead machinery, the acrid smell of fried electronics stinging my nostrils. I had destroyed the evidence, but I had also lost the only potential witness who could explain what the evidence was. I crawled out of the shed, my heart hammering, and peered toward the main cabin. 2 more figures had emerged from the shadows near the house, leaner, faster-moving individuals wearing dark, unmarked tactical gear. They were securing Chloe, who was struggling weakly now. As I watched, one of the new figures, the one holding Chloe, turned slightly. His face was obscured by shadow, but as he pivoted, a glint of metal caught the residual light from the yard lamp. It wasn't a weapon. It was a small silver lapel pin, intricately designed, shaped like a stylized laurel wreath intertwined with a serpent. I knew that insignia. I had seen it hundreds of times on the expensive stationery and the private security cars that always circled my Uncle Henderson's corporate headquarters. These weren't independent operators cleaning up after Marcus. These were my uncle's people, moving in to clean up the mess Marcus had made, and they had clearly been expecting Marcus, not me. The operative holding Chloe suddenly shoved her hard against the wooden porch railing. He leaned in close, his voice low enough that I could barely catch it over the wind, but the words struck me like physical blows. "Tell your uncle," he hissed at Chloe, "that the silence agreement is void. The death is called in." Then he raised his hand, and I saw not a gun, but a syringe filled with a clear liquid. Before I could move, before I could even yell, he plunged it into Chloe's neck. She went limp instantly, collapsing onto the porch steps. I stumbled backward, adrenaline draining away, leaving behind a terrifying hollowness. They hadn't just silenced her, they had neutralized her permanently, quickly and quietly. They were professionals dealing with a catastrophic leak. And I was standing 50 feet away, realizing I wasn't investigating a wedding photographer's incompetence. I was investigating a high-level conspiracy involving my own family, and I was the next loose end. As I turned to flee back into the black woods, I heard a faint, almost inaudible sound coming from the main cabin, a single repeating chime, like an incoming text message on an old, simple phone. The sound stopped, and then the voice I recognized from the satellite phone, the cold, authoritative voice, spoke one more time, clearly and directly toward the woods where I hid. "Mark, we know you took the corrupted drive. Bring it to the gate by dawn, or we bring your fiancé to meet us here." The ultimatum hung in the cold mountain air, sharp and undeniable. Bring it to the gate by dawn, or we bring your fiancé to meet us here. They knew my name, they knew Sarah's, and they knew exactly what I had snatched from that shed. The physically destroyed, but perhaps still viable, external drive. I didn't need to see the faces of the men guarding Chloe's motionless body to know the chilling sincerity behind that threat. They weren't bluffing. These were the people who made my Uncle Henderson look terrified in the rehearsal dinner photo. I had maybe 5 hours before sunrise. I fled, scrambling blindly back down the narrow dirt track, the image of Chloe collapsing imprinted behind my eyelids. My car was parked a quarter-mile away. I reached it, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped them into the underbrush. Inside the car, the reality of the corrupted drive hit me. I had smashed it against the server rack. The casing was dented, but the internal platters might have survived the impact, though the data transfer port was likely ruined. I pulled a small multi-tool from the glove compartment and carefully started prying open the drive enclosure, working under the weak dome light. As I wrestled with the stubborn metal casing, I replayed the events. Marcus, the photographer, wasn't the mastermind. He was the bait, the digital scapegoat. He set up the deletion schedule to cover the extraction of incriminating evidence, the high-res photos showing Uncle Henderson doing something treasonous or corrupt, evidenced by the terror on his face and the exchange with the suited man bearing the Henderson security emblem. Marcus deleted our copies to destroy the only proof that proof existed. Then, these cleanup crew members arrived to terminate Marcus's loose end, Chloe, and retrieve the transferred master files she was monitoring. And now, they had the drive I destroyed, but they were demanding the corrupted drive.
meaning the physical piece of hardware I was holding. They wanted the shell, or perhaps they believed the damage wasn't total. Finally, the casing popped open. I gently extracted the internal platter, a thin metallic disc, inspecting it under the faint glow of my phone screen. There were visible scratches, deep gouges across the magnetic surface, but, miraculously, a central section seemed relatively unscratched. It was a long shot, but if any part of the data survived, it would be there. I drove maniacally back toward the city, aiming for the only person I trusted with obscure, highly specialized data recovery, Dr. Lena Hansen, a retired cryptographer who ran a barely legal, cash-only IT consulting firm out of a basement apartment near the university district. I arrived just before 3 a.m. Lena, fueled by 3 pots of black coffee, took one look at my ashen face and the dented drive and simply nodded toward her workstation. She didn't ask questions. She just asked for payment up front. "I can try a clean room recovery," she muttered, already setting up specialized magnetic scanners. "But if those scratches are deep enough, the data is fractured. Even if I pull files, they might be corrupted beyond reconstruction. If this is anything related to the defense sector, Mark, you need to understand that whoever you're fighting has resources far beyond local law enforcement." I gave her the full truncated story, the photos, the security pin, the syringe. Lena stopped breathing for a moment, her eyes wide behind her safety glasses. "Mark, if that insignia belongs to Henderson Industry Security, you are playing chess against national interests. They don't just sue you, they erase you. If those drives hold proof of your uncle trading state secrets, you have less than an hour before they decide you're easier to contain than to negotiate with." We worked in tense silence for the next 2 hours. Lena used specialized low-power laser mapping to create a spectral image of the platter surface. At 4:45 a.m., she suddenly gasped and pointed at the screen. "Mark, look here! A contiguous block survived the impact. It's not just photos. There's an encrypted data stream file overlaid on the image data. It seems Marcus didn't just steal photos. He used the wedding album as a delivery mechanism for something else, a dead drop for sensitive information." She ran a decryption algorithm tailored for older proprietary protocols, the kind Marcus, as a high-end vendor, might have access to. The file opened. It wasn't an image, it was a detailed ledger, a massive spreadsheet filled with transaction codes, dates, and names. And there, on the top line, next to a transaction code referencing Project Chimera and a date 3 days before the wedding, was my Uncle Henderson's full corporate ID number. But the name listed next to it wasn't Henderson. It was Asset Zero. The accompanying text file was shorter, a chillingly casual note appended to the ledger. Henderson leveraged his position for access keys. Exchange complete. Photos taken to ensure plausible deniability should data be recovered later. See attached final package for confirmation. Attached to the ledger was a single clear photograph, the one that had been doctored in the initial proof sets, the one that was now completely wiped from our cloud. It showed Uncle Henderson, not arguing, but standing stiffly between the 2 men, the man with the laurel wreath pin and Marcus, the photographer. Marcus wasn't looking nervous. He was looking smug, shaking hands with the security operative, receiving a thick, unmarked envelope. Marcus hadn't been paid off to delete the photos. He had been paid off to deliver them as proof of concept to the shadowy organization running Asset Zero, my uncle, thereby completing the transaction and securing his own exit. They paid him to deliver the evidence to them, to show them the exchange happened, and then they erased our copies so we couldn't expose the whole thing later, I muttered, feeling physically ill. He played us both. The clock on Lena's monitor ticked over to 5:15 a.m. Dawn was less than an hour away. I grabbed the recovered ledger and the crucial photograph onto a clean, encrypted flash drive Lena immediately prepared. "I have to go to the gate. I have to trade this drive for Sarah," I said, standing up. Lena grabbed my arm, her face etched with fear. "No, Mark.
If you go to them, you become Asset Zero's liability. They will take Sarah, and then they will take you. You have proof now.
You need to go to the authorities. The right authorities, not local police, and expose Henderson.
I shook my head, looking at the photo of Sarah's face, her smile frozen on the screen before I deleted the main folders. I can't risk them hurting her because I went looking for backup. I have to follow the instructions. I'll trade the drive for her safe release. I need to see her face again. I ran out of Lena's basement, the encryption key for the recovered files burning a hole in my pocket. The drive in my hand contained enough evidence to ruin a major defense contractor and land my uncle in prison for decades. I drove toward the private access road leading to Uncle Henderson's sprawling, isolated estate, the only place that fit the description of the gate. When I reached the perimeter fence, a 10-foot electrified mesh barrier with high-definition cameras, it was 5:52 a.m. The sky was beginning to lighten to a sickly gray. A single spotlight illuminated a section of the gate. Standing there, silhouetted against the false dawn, was not one man, but three, and standing between them, visibly distressed but unharmed, was Sarah. She looked pale, but she was standing on her own 2 feet. Relief washed over me so powerfully I almost pulled over. They kept their word. I stopped the car 20 yards from the gate mechanism. I rolled down my window, clutching the drive. "I have what you asked for," I yelled, my voice hoarse. "Let Sarah go!" The man in the center, the one with the laurel wreath pin clearly visible on his tactical vest, raised a hand. He nodded curtly toward Sarah. As if on cue, the 2 guards flanking her stepped back, allowing her to walk toward the gate. Sarah stumbled forward, relief and exhaustion etched on her face. She reached the heavy metal barrier and threw herself against it, sobbing my name. "Mark! Oh God, Mark! They said if you didn't come, they were going to—" She choked on the words, pointing frantically past the guards toward the main house. I looked past the guards toward the towering modern structure of my uncle's mansion, and standing on the upper veranda, bathed in the first rays of the rising sun, was a figure that shouldn't have been there. He looked calm, dressed in a bespoke suit, watching the exchange with a proprietary interest. It was Marcus, the photographer. He wasn't out of the country. He was standing there, not looking smug, but looking tired, holding a very old-fashioned leather-bound photo album. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Sarah. And then Marcus slowly opened the album, flipping past the first blank page, revealing the first photograph inside. It wasn't a picture of our wedding. It was a picture of Sarah, much younger, standing next to a man I didn't recognize. And Marcus slowly raised a hand and pointed directly at that man in the old photograph. He mouthed a single, devastating word toward Sarah across the distance, a word that ripped the reality of the last 6 weeks apart. Daddy. The single, devastating word Marcus mouthed, Daddy, hit me harder than any physical blow. The world tilted. Sarah, still pressed against the gate, looked up at Marcus on the veranda, and the flood of relief I'd felt moments before curdled into absolute, paralyzing horror. Her expression wasn't just distress, it was profound, aching complicity. The realization struck with the force of a physical blow. Marcus hadn't been hired by my uncle. Marcus had been hired by Sarah. The entire wedding debacle, the exorbitant fees, the accidental data purging, the coded messages, it wasn't a cover-up for my uncle's corporate espionage. It was a meticulously orchestrated operation designed to retrieve leverage against him, leverage that Sarah clearly needed, and Marcus was the facilitator.
The evidence he transferred wasn't just proof of my uncle's dealings. It was the payoff Marcus received for completing the extraction, a payment secured by the photos that showed Henderson's weakness. I looked down at the recovered drive in my hand, the ledger detailing Asset Zero, Uncle Henderson, and the Project Chimera transaction. It was leverage, yes, but leverage for Sarah, not against her. She didn't marry me for love.
She married me to gain proximity to the man she wanted to destroy. The man in the photograph, who was now revealed to be her biological father.
"Mark, listen to me," Sarah shouted across the lawn, her voice cracking with desperation, finally dropping the facade of the terrified victim. "It's complicated. He ruined everything. You have to trust me." The security operative with the pin, the man who had injected Chloe, stepped forward, his hand resting casually on Sarah's shoulder now. He looked at me with cold contempt.
"The terms were clear, son. You bring the drive, she walks free. You've done your part. Now leave."
I looked at Sarah, truly seeing her for the first time in months. Not the adoring fiancée, but a predator who had used our entire relationship as a Trojan horse. The deleted photos weren't just about my uncle's corruption. They were about the moment he was caught, leveraging secrets to stop Sarah's mother, perhaps, or to silence a past affair that threatened his public image. Marcus had photographed the exchange, not as a photographer, but as an operative, documenting a hostile takeover of information. I dropped the small encrypted flash drive containing the ledger and the vital photo onto the ground between my car and the fence line. "No more trades," I said, my voice steady despite the internal earthquake. "You want the leverage? You can have the ledger."
But Sarah stays with me until I see the real evidence, the evidence Marcus gave you, and I see it untainted. The operative with the pin moved instantly, lunging for the flash drive, but I was faster. I kicked the small device hard, sending it skittering under the high-voltage fence, just out of reach of his grasping hand. "You clean up your father's mess. You pay Marcus, you get your ledger," I spat at Sarah. "But you don't get to walk away clean with my life tied up in your secrets." This broke the carefully negotiated truce. The guards immediately shifted their attention from securing Sarah to protecting the dropped evidence. Sarah saw her window closing, the fragile peace shattered by my refusal to trust her.
"He's bluffing! Don't let him leave!" she screamed at the security team.
The man on the veranda, my Uncle Henderson, finally moved. He didn't shout. He simply turned and walked back inside the mansion. His departure was a signal. The game was over. The lead guard made a split-second decision. He shoved Sarah hard against the gate one last time, sending her sprawling, and then turned to retrieve the flash drive. The second guard raised his weapon, aiming not at me, but at the space between my car and the fence, an obvious warning shot. I didn't wait for the third guard, who was circling wide, trying to cut me off from the road. I threw the transmission into reverse, slammed the accelerator, and spun the car wildly in a tight U-turn, tires spitting gravel and dirt into the startled guards. I didn't look back at Sarah, lying on the cold ground near the fence, her elaborate wedding plans now reduced to ashes of truth. I drove toward Lena's basement, the only safe harbor left. I knew I couldn't go to the authorities yet.
If the ledger was genuine, Henderson was playing a deadly game with defense contracts, and I couldn't expose him without exposing Sarah's entire elaborate deception, which would likely put a target on my back so large I wouldn't survive the filing process. But I had something Marcus didn't account for. The original corrupted physical drive I'd pulled from the shed. It was sitting in my passenger seat, dented but intact, waiting for Lena to work her magic. Marcus had transferred the files, but maybe, just maybe, the physical hardware still held residual data, a complete, unedited metadata log of every file transfer, every remote command Marcus executed before he purged our copies. It was the smoking gun showing the digital destruction was intentional, directly linking Marcus to the retrieval team now working for Sarah and Henderson. When I burst into Lena's dimly lit office an hour later, she was already waiting, having called an emergency contact in cyber forensics she trusted implicitly. "I mapped the drive," she said quietly, her face grim. "The data is fractured, but the log files are recoverable. Marcus didn't just transfer the wedding photos. He transferred every unapproved image from the last 6 months of his client work, including the raw, untouched rehearsal dinner photos and a full, uncompressed security feed from the venue's back entrance. He created a blackmail portfolio on your uncle, and Sarah was using him to execute the retrieval."
Lena slid an external monitor toward me. On it glowed the single, perfect, high-resolution photograph of Uncle Henderson's terrified face, standing next to the man with the laurel wreath pin, exchanging the envelope. It was the proof, the undeniable, untamperable truth of the whole conspiracy. I looked at the image, then down at the dented drive. Sarah thought she'd won her leverage by getting the ledger, but I had the metadata trail.
She had relied on Marcus's expertise to cover her tracks, but Marcus, in his hubris, had failed to secure the very hardware he used to execute the transfer. I didn't want revenge, and I certainly didn't want a life married to a liar. I wanted the truth out, cleanly and safely, without putting myself in the line of fire from either my powerful uncle or my manipulative fiancé. I handed Lena a prepaid burner phone and the recovered drive. Lena, I need you to take this data, the ledger, the full metadata from this drive, and every unapproved photo, and deliver it anonymously to the Justice Department's Public Integrity Division. Send it from a server farm in a country with no extradition treaty. Do not tell anyone where it came from, and do not tell me when it's done. Lena nodded, already plugging the drive into a secure air-gap system. Consider it done. You need to disappear, Mark. Now. I walked out of that basement an hour later, leaving behind the ghost of the man who planned a future with Sarah. I didn't go back to our apartment. I didn't call my family. I took the cash I had stored offshore and bought a one-way ticket to a place where no one knew the names Henderson or M.I.L. Photography. The wedding photos were gone, deleted by a woman who used my commitment as a weapon. But in their absence, I found something far more valuable than memories. The cold, hard truth about the people I thought I loved, and the evidence that would bring their entire dangerous network crashing down, all thanks to one very clumsy, very accidental deletion. I never saw Sarah or my uncle again, but 6 months later, watching a news report from a small cafe in South America, I saw the familiar, ornate logo of Henderson Industries fade to black on the screen, replaced by the seal of federal seizure. The story mentioned the anonymous leak that exposed massive financial irregularities and security breaches. They never mentioned the wedding photographer. That secret, at least, belonged only to me.